I love comments like this because it gives me a full opportunity to describe various different things in the system which I wouldn't necessarily describe as a scam, but I certainly question. So here's a delightful comment left on my social media from Ian, who seems to think that my #1 best-selling book that helps disabled people evidence their health and disability, because nobody else will help them unless they want to pay them £650 an hour, which is what lawyers charge, a scam. So here's the book in question, yet another Amazon #1 bestseller, but it's always more cheaper on my website, along with extra additionals that would be very helpful. So I thought, let's really drill down into the cost of evidencing your disability, and we'll weigh it up against my £9.99 book or £5.99 if you buy it on Kindle. Now, I set those prices, but sometimes Amazon charge more for them and sometimes they charge less. More often than not, they charge more, which is why I always say buy it on my website, because I can fully control the price. Anyway, let's get to the question of scams. So I'm going to start this, Ian, because you probably aren't at all disabled or have any chronic illnesses or health conditions. Most people that do didn't ask for those things. I got driven into at 60 miles an hour. Then I actually got attacked when I was working at DWP in the job centre. Something else I didn't actually ask for. And one of the reasons why I got attacked at the job centre was because actually somebody was scamming. It wasn't me. Now, I have a long-term physical disability and a mental health one as well. All of my conditions are fully diagnosed by the NHS, by the way, Ian. So I'm pretty sure you're not going to call fully qualified doctors and consultants scammers either, just in case you thought of going down that road. Anyway, one of the reasons I feel so fundamentally moved about helping people evidence their disability is because I truly believe it was used to, well, it was weaponised against me when I took legal action against DWP. Of course, they're going to disagree with that, but that's what I think. Now, the cost of me suing DWP, their legal team, which, by the way, the taxpayer has to pay now because DWP didn't follow their own policies on disabilities in the workplace, the Equality Act, and of course, harassment, which is another point of my case that I won as well. The cost that the taxpayer has had to pick up for DWP's mistake is this much. So it's £184,000. I didn't have to pay that, by the way. So just so you're clear, Ian, I went off to work as a disabled person after being driven into at 60 miles an hour, well, a couple of years later, and went to work for the Department of Work and Pensions, who one would think would follow their own policies for disability and employment in the workplace, and they didn't follow those. And then one might say that I was scammed. Really, one may say that. I'm not saying that, but one may say that, because I then had to undergo a 5-year court case to have my rights vindicated as a disabled person. And well, maybe the taxpayer feels scammed. I don't know. Maybe the taxpayer feels scammed out of £184,000 for DWP not following their own policies. So we'll start there, shall we? So there's a cost of £184,000. So let's just, get to the point. All the lawyers got paid. All the barristers got paid, all the judges got paid, all the porters and ushers in the court, they all got paid for every single day they were in court and preparing all of these documents that cost the taxpayer £184,000. They all got paid for a government department not following its own policies. And I won't bore you too much, but as you can see, everyone from a trainee to a senior associate got paid by the taxpayer to assist DWP in court for not following their own policies under the Equality Act of 2010, and of course the Employment Act itself and the Harassment Act. And by the way, some of those costs include DWP solicitors watching me on social media. So hello, LLPs. Now let's look at my costs, because I self-represented as a paralegal, a solicitor and a barrister in 3 different cases. Not that I'm legally qualified, but I had to fulfil those jobs pretty much more or less against a barrister of 20 years experience, one of the top ones from Oxford, who's also award-winning. Which I will say, the whole process massively affected my health so badly. I still have various different conditions, which I'm not going to go into today in this video, which will never ever get better. So I'm just thinking of the price I should be putting on that. Of course, you know, courts probably wouldn't agree with it, because we must do what we must do for these organisations, mustn't we? Anyway, let's get on with the costs. I know you're very concerned about the costs. Now let's look at the costs of somebody trying to struggle on their own, perhaps not with my knowledge of the disability or indeed the DWP system. First of all, they're going to have a software cost of £35 a month, and that is very, very cheap, just to organise their paperwork so the court will accept it. I created Justice Writer Pro actually, so people didn't have to pay £700 a month, but still £35 is still a cost. And when you bear in mind that most tribunals go on for a minimum of a year, because of course we have to wait for all of the judges to turn up to court and then tell us they're all so busy that they haven't read any of the evidence, so then we have to explain it all in court, which is definitely what I've done every single time I've been in court actually, which obviously does take up a lot of the court time. It's probably one of the reasons why the court timetable is just, you know, all over the place. Anyway, let's just say everyone's been super efficient in the justice system. You've made your application and it's all going to be heard in a year. Very, very unlikely, I might add, but just for the benefit of you, Ian, because I don't want you to think that, you know, I'm playing the system here, £420 a month just for the software alone. Now, legal advice, you could go to the CAB, but we all know if anyone's tried to use a CAB that really they just Google it. Really, they're doing the best they can. You can just do that at home, can't you? Or you could go and see a qualified legal advisor like a solicitor. That's normally £650 an hour. Barristers are between 7,700, but 7 to 900 plus VAT, and about, well, £2,500–3,000 an hour. I mean, take your pick. So let's just say you would go and get 10 or 20 hours of legal advice. That's going to be 650. Well, let's just do it by 10, you know, just go on the easy side. Oh, that's £6,500. Oh, let's just say all the time this is going on, you've become very unwell. You might have had a bit of a breakdown, maybe had severe stress and anxiety, maybe your bowels just completely took over. So you know, can't really go anywhere but stay by the toilet, and you have to take time off work, and anything over 7 days for most people, because if they're anything like DWP, they don't apply the disability trigger points. It means you're going to be put on half pay, because that's exactly what DWP tried to do to me before I reminded them of their own policy regarding disability trigger points, which is protected under the Equality Act of 2010, I might add. But however, because they chose to ignore that as well, Ian, that meant that there was a loss also of income to me. So we'll just add, you know, maybe a month in, shall we? Over the like a couple of years, we'll just add a month in. We'll go on the easy side. So that's about a take-home pay of £1,700. That's right. Everything from dealing with suicide to homelessness and even being attacked in the job centre, a whole £1,700. Amazing, really. What a gift it is to work there. Anyway, now let's just add up all of the different court hearings I had to go, which was a 2-week court hearing, plus a 1-week court hearing, plus 5 different preliminary hearings. So if I just top that all up, that's about 5 weeks. And then I had to do all of the bundles and everything myself for every single hearing and every single process, and write all of the letters. Now, I obviously can't charge, you know, a solicitor's rate, and I do believe a litigant in person rate is about £21 an hour. And in actual fact, I do have an invoice that I put in the bundle, so I'll just pull that up. Oh, And before I show you that, quite a lot of my costs were because DWP just wouldn't follow the orders of the court. And then we had Judge Rayner, who I had to keep reminding that, she'd issued an order and the DWP hadn't followed it. I had to remind them both quite a few times on that one, actually. So yeah, there's quite a lot of work involved in doing that, because obviously judges aren't the easiest people sometimes to remind of actually what they should be doing, which is following their own orders, because of course I had to follow the order. So let's just get my costs. And just so some of this makes sense to you, some of my costs related to the deliberate distortion, in my opinion, of evidence, malicious continuation of monitoring, from my home address to online, misuse of state resources for retaliation, and public defamation and professional stigma. I mean, of course, DWP disagreed completely with this, and they're entitled to have their opinion, and I'm also very entitled to have mine. Let's not forget I did win unlawful harassment, just to keep reminding you of that, Ian. And of course, I've even referred to a couple of cases there. Thompson versus the Commissioner of Police, of all people. It's quite a good case, that one, actually. So yes, interesting. So yes, I've referred to that in my submission of costs for the court, just so they fully understood it, just like I'm doing for you as well, Ian. And then, of course, I do seek compensation, or sought compensation for the future loss of earnings, because obviously being fired after I took legal action against a government department for them not following their own policies, and then pretending it's because I accessed something that I didn't, because I wasn't even in my house. But bearing in mind I was doing fraud projects, I actually had national clearance to access any universal credit claim anyway, should I have needed to, for the purposes of my job, which I did not do. Now, I'm not going to discuss that, because I am going to wait for the appeals court to work out exactly why the Department of Work and Pensions submitted to Southampton Employment Tribunal 3 different versions of that evidence, all very different. And it's only meant to be just like one printout. Anyway, we'll leave that with the appeals court. So now we get into the costs, obviously. My loss of pension, my loss of benefits and allowances, medical and therapy costs during that 5-year period. That's already a loss of £172,000. Future loss of earnings as well. And then we've got the injury to feelings, psychiatric and physical harm. Now, I must point out here that the judge in my case did not agree, because apparently me having PTSD, anxiety, suffering from stress and depression, I was just too sensitive. So because of that, there was no harm to my injuries really that she thought warranted any money at all, really, apart from the unlawful harassment part. Agree to disagree. I'll be dealing with that in another situation. Anyway, this is all the other costs involved when you bring a claim, because you have to itemize every single thing. So now I have been very, very economical, because actually I spent a lot more time than this, but there is a ceiling. Of course, unless you're DWP and their legal team, there is a ceiling that someone like myself, a litigant in person means representing yourself, if you don't understand that, Ian. I can only claim a certain amount. But of course, if you're a lawyer, a barrister, you can really claim what you want. And of course, as we know, judges are paid by the taxpayer. So they're going to get paid for all their time, apparently reading, or not reading in my case, some of the evidence, because I think had the judge have read the evidence, then she would have realised that in the evidence DWP hadn't reducted, so that's blacked out, over 300 universal credit claimants' names and national insurance numbers. But the point I'm making is, if the judge and her panel had read the evidence, then they would have seen that, wouldn't they? So that's an interesting point. Well, so as we can see, an awful lot here gone into it. Well, actually, I challenged the costs that were put in by DWP's legal team. And most of it really, I don't understand why on earth they're putting in putting in costs, for example, preparing witness statements, £40,000, guys, that is right at the top, particularly when their own witness, Josie Hooper, I can name that person, said that, you know, they, like, these solicitors wrote the witness statements. Solicitors aren't meant to write witness statements. They're meant to, you know, maybe type up what the witnesses have written, but they're not meant to actually write the witness statements themselves and then just get the witness to sign it. I mean, that's a little bit of an issue there, but anyway, apparently not for the judge in my case. Anyway, as we can go on, I got those costs whittled down to £17,450, quite successfully there. Anyway, let's go on. By the way, Ian, and any other taxpayers, I'm guessing you're a taxpayer, Ian. I'm also a taxpayer, was before, am now. Had I not have challenged those costs, who knows what would have happened? Because, yeah, that's an awful lot of an invoice, isn't it? Anyway, I think roughly in the entire 5-year period, maybe 8,000, probably nearly 1,000, maybe £1,200 worth of printing costs. Then I had to buy special briefcases with rollers to have everything taken into court. So it's another 120, probably around about that. Anyway, my total cost summed up, because obviously this was a consequential claim, went to well over £1 million. 1.69 million to be exact. And for me, most of that was because of the procedural unfairness and the breach of code. That's a code of conduct that all civil servants must abide by. And obviously the procedural unfairness, so basically not following their own policies and the laws, making it then necessary for me to go through this whole endeavour, which if they had followed their own policies would never have been necessary at all. However, that wasn't the case for me, Ian, and that's not the case as well for lots of other people as well, because it seems to be as soon as you have a disability and you require support, or if you have a disability or a health condition and you're ill-treated because of that disability, then our country seems to have a huge problem in actually dealing with that. Everybody else can be paid in this whole scenario apart from the victims themselves. It seems to be quite a problem here in the UK. Now let's just pretend you're not me, that you haven't worked for DWP, that you do not have my knowledge and understanding of the experience that I've had within the legal system. I will add to this, I'm partly qualified solicitor as an SQE1, not completely, haven't finished everything, but I have done various studies to date. So I have a good understanding of certain areas of law, particularly disability. But as I said, this is not legal advice, I'm not legally qualified, and I'm definitely not legally qualified to give out advice. It's just my interpretation of the situation. And as I said, let's just imagine somebody else, you know, they haven't done any of these things, they haven't got this knowledge. Who are they going to go for to help? Ian, who? Are they going to get all of this support and advice at the job centre? Are they going to get all of this support and advice from PIP assessors, disability assessors? Are they going to get this support and advice from Maximus and Access to Work? Are they going to get this support and advice from their doctor that says you can only discuss one thing and it can't be any longer than 3 minutes? Where are people who are disabled actually going to get intricate, detailed, comprehensive, rock solid advice that they can then apply to their unique situation to help them, so that they don't have to go through what I had to go through, which has cost the taxpayer £184,000? So I ask you the question, Ian, where is the scam? Where? Not who is scamming, perhaps, maybe that should be a question. Where is the scam? Because if I was to add up all of these costs here, right, as if you weren't me, that would cost the average person about 10 grand. Round it up, £9,940, about £10,000, probably a lot more, because 10 hours of legal advice doesn't go far. And then of course, if you want any legal documents or any legal letters written, that is a bog standard £250 an hour plus VAT. So it's going to be a lot more than 10 grand. How much is PIP for the year at the higher rate? Let me help you in, because you probably don't know. Well, PIP, if you get both elements, is £196.40 a week. Okay, a week. Now, as we all know, there are 52 weeks in the year, right? So if we multiply £196.40 multiplied by 52, you're probably quicker than I am, Ian. But anyway, I'm going to pause whilst I add that up, and then I'll tell you what that is. 10,000, sorry, all of these figures, I'm getting a bit overwhelmed. £10,212.80. That's correct. There we are. So that's what somebody's going to get a year on PIP if they do their applications correctly and they're entitled to it and they evidence it in the right way. And as we know, there's been a new law that's been passed that basically, well, guidance, not a law, if people evidence their PIP applications and do things properly the first time, renewals are coming round and they're being automatically renewed for 5 years. So if you imagine someone was awarded that the first time, that's 10,000, and then you multiply that by 5 years, that means that person, if they're successful, they could potentially be entitled to £51,000, right? So let's just go back to people like this will get stopped. It shows what a real scam is. The genuine people will get struck off. Well, I disagree, because genuine people who have genuine health conditions, they don't know how to evidence their health conditions because most of those people are too ill or unable to due to medication or just education or just not having the skill set that is required to combat an entire legal team of £184,000 judges, disability assessors and all the like. I mean, feel free to argue with me if you want, Ian. If you think everybody that is applying for PIP is a fair old match for a team of lawyers from DWP, PIP assessors and judges, go ahead. But I'm pretty sure they're not. So if we take into account how much everything costs, 184 grand for lawyers and judges, people who are successful, they're going to hopefully get, 10 grand a year more or less, or 51 grand. And then there's my book, which I'm charging £9.99 for. And if you want to go all out, really go rock and roll, get the health journal as well. Most of the time it's about 20 quid for the year. So to evidence your PIP so that you can potentially get, if you're entitled to it, £10,000 a year, more or less, because all of these systems have become so complex and they are armed with such legally qualified experts that the average layperson, the average Joe Bloggs, your auntie, your sister, your uncle, your brother down the road or living next door who might have been run over, might have, by a car, might have had his fingers chopped off at work when he was woodworking. You think I'm the scammer, do you? And you think people applying for PIP, the genuine ones, aren't going to get what they're entitled to because of my book. Who's the one complicating the situation here? Is it me or is it the system? Because quite frankly, I think if people have got doctor's evidence and diagnosis and all the rest of it, why they're having to undergo interviews and assessments like they've just committed the worst crime ever and we've had to bring in MI5, I just do not know. But that is a state of affairs for most people when they apply for a disability benefit. And heaven forbid you go up against somebody like the Department of Work and Pensions who hasn't complied with the Equality Act, which is law by the way, and put into practice what they are legally mandated to do, then you're going to have this to think about. So I ask you, who's scamming? Because it's certainly not me, and it's certainly not my book at $9.99. Anyway, I'm sure you're going to have a delightful day, Ian, because I most definitely am. But I just thought it would be really nice to put those figures in front of you. You might want to go away and think about it before you come onto my feed again and make those comments. And for anybody else that shares the same common values as good old Ian here, maybe you want to have a bit of a reality check. Because as I said, the only people getting paid here are the lawyers, the judges, the solicitors, and the disability assessors, and of course the people at the job centre. All of those people are getting paid. Nobody else is. So there we go. All right, anyway, have a lovely day. Take care. See you in the next one, guys.